Okay, so we're back online, we're streaming again, and unfortunately, our lunch got here about 10 minutes ago, so we're still in the middle of it. But to keep things on track with our delegations, we're gonna make sure that we stay on time. So we have municipal affairs on the phone, not on the phone, on Teams as well, so this is item 7.1 on assessment. Alicia?
Your worship, members of council, in preparation for our taxation review that's coming up for our taxation rates bylaw, we like to bring in the assessors for all of our assets within the community. So we have members from the Assessment Services branch on Teams with us who will be presenting to you on our designated industrial property assessments. And I will ask that they introduce themselves to you once we turn it over to them. And then following the presentation from the Provincial Assessment Services branch, we have representatives from Accurate Assessment Group who will be walking council through changes to our residential and non-residential assessment. I will also ask them to introduce themselves to all of you when it's their turn to present.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that, I mean, you can just go into the presentation. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you then. I'll just go through a quick introduction of everybody at the table here as well. I'm going to start down at the far end with our CAO, Mr. Frank, and then we'll just work our way around the room so everybody knows everybody.
Gordon Frank, Chief Administrative Officer.
Janine Grunberg. I'm a lawyer with Brownlee, but I'm just finishing my lunch and then I'll be out of here.
Devin Williams, Council Division 7.
Bruce Presley, Council Division 5.
David Cush, Councilor Division 1.
My name's John Burrows. I'm the Reeve with Division 2.
Peter Kilkin, I'm Councilor for Division 6.
Jeremy Wilhelm, Division 4.
Alan Dean, Division 3.
Joan Slutwig, Manager of Planning and Community Services.
And Alicia Borbeau, the Director of Corporate Services for Woodlands County. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon, Woodlands County. I'm Janet Hayes, and I am a Senior Assessment Advisor in the Property Assessment area, specifically in the Well and Pipeline area. Tally will be available through the presentation to answer questions on the non-linear designated industrial properties. On the line with us to listen in today, and who are also from the PA's office, we have David Emery, who is the Manager of Linear Assessment and Data Management. We have Joanne Horton, Bandy Yoti, Weston Bennett, Lisa Victor, and Belfer Dusange, who are all assessment advisors for designated industrial property. Today, I will be speaking about a few general items from the PA's office and about the designated industrial property assessment. So who we are your designated industrial property assessment team. We work on behalf of the Provincial Assessor's Office, and our staff has a wide range of skills and designations. To name a few, we have assessors, we have accountants, engineers, geospatial specialists, we have project managers, and we have specialists in all types of IT software, for example, SAP. Our office prepares the assessment. We amend it if we find any changes that need to be done, and we defend it to the Land and Property Rights Tribunal. Okay, next. Assessment Services Branch. Our senior management level is Victoria Bachman. She is our Executive Director. She has been with the department for approximately 8 to 9 weeks. we have Mike Menard, who is the director of the Centralized Industrial Property Assessment Unit. This unit looks after the non-linear DI property assessment for the province. We'll go into it a little bit further, but this would include like your oil and gas facilities and your major plants. Chris Risling, she is the provincial assessor and also the director of linear assessment and data management. Later on, we will go over which property types are linear. Michael Tachin, he is the director of projects. The main project that is currently being worked on is the construction of our new Gamma system. It is our new assessment system. It will combine the designated industrial linear property with the DI nonlinear industrial property into one in-house assessment system. This system will have numerous capabilities, including the potential to tie together some of the nonlinear properties, such as oil and gas facilities, to the pipeline and well facilities. This will be huge, as the AER doesn't even have all this information. So we're hoping we can be a success at this. Next slide. Our annual operational cycle. This is our high level. It's our cycle at a high level. So what we do is we prepare the provincial assessment roll, and it's based on the collection and analysis of designated industrial property data. This includes the information that is provided by companies based on the request for information, plus numerous other data sources such as the Alberta Energy Regulator, the Alberta Utilities Commission, and geospatial information, to just name a few. We send out the assessment roll to the municipalities, and we send out the assessment notices to the property owners. The stakeholders review this information, and they contact us for any questions or concerns or changes they would like to see done to any of their properties. We then amend the assessment where we see a change is required, and we send out an amended notice and roll to the municipalities and an amended notice to the companies. And then if we don't feel the property needs to be amended, sometimes we do get complaints filed to the Land and Property Rights Tribunal. And sometimes we end up having to defend it in front of the board, which can take months, even years, to get a resolution from the board on a decision. And that's our cycle. And then the next year begins, and we collect and analyze data, and we provide the assessment roll and whatnot. Next slide. And here is our timeline for the designated industrial. The linear assessment was sent out about a month prior to the industrial. We sent it out on January 31st. The notice of assessment date was February 8th. The MGB, which is now the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, the deadline for the complaints for linear was April 11th, which was on Monday. We did receive a couple complaints in linear, but we will get to that in a few slides coming up. The amended notice was scheduled for tomorrow. However, we have pushed it by a week. So our amended notices, we plan on sending out next week, April 20th or so. And then the new complaint date will be around June 27th, 28th. The industrial notices were sent out on February 25th. The complaint date is coming up here in a few weeks, May 6th. The amended assessment for them is scheduled to be May 13th with a complaint date of July 25th. Next slide. Your designated industrial property requisition timeline. So the requisition rate is based on the total assessment base and the amount to be requisitioned. In March, once the DI assessments are completed, a ministerial order is prepared and approved by the minister with the updated rates. This MO is sent to all the CEOs. In April, then we update the website. The municipalities apply their tax rate to the tax notices for the eligible properties on the tax notices of the companies. And then the municipalities collect the monies from the company and remit the payments collected for the DI portion to the government of Alberta. In February of the following year, a reconciliation of the assessment value based on any amended assessments that happened throughout the year or any decisions that changed the assessment at the land RPT gets calculated and sent out to all the CEOs where there was a change. And next slide. So this lists out the difference between your linear property and your industrial property. Both are designated industrial property. However, they do break out into these categories. Linear property is your pipelines, your wells, your telecommunication and cable distribution systems, your electric power systems, your electric power generation facilities, and your railway, which came to the province in 2018. Your industrial property would be your facilities regulated by the Alberta Energy Regulator, the Alberta Utilities Commission, and the Canada Energy Regulator. The Canada Energy Regulator would have the pipelines that cross provincial jurisdictions. Your examples for the industrial would include the equipment at the well sites, your batteries, your compressor stations, stuff like that. It also includes your properties on the major plant list and the machinery and equipment assessment minister's guidelines. These would include your gas plants, pipeline terminals, pulp and paper mills, refineries, and petrochemical plants. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here are the taxable assessment values for the full province of Alberta. Provincially, there was an increase of industrial property of $1,088 million, a 1.08 increase overall. For linear property, there was an increase of $354.8 million, or a 0.5% increase for linear assessments. Okay, next slide. For Woodlands County, there was a difference in $4.6 million in assessment increase, 0.62% increase. For linear property, it was an increase of $20.1 million, or 2.99% in assessment value. This may be a bit surprising to see that the pipelines and the wells did increase with the new tax holiday policy that was put into place this year. However, we did see a company that went into receivership a couple of years ago. A bunch of their properties were purchased by a viable company. So the assessment has now gone on numerous well and pipeline properties for this year. Next slide. Speaking of the tax holiday, back in October 2020, Minister Aylar did make the announcement that any new well and pipeline construction would not be taxed for the next 3 years, starting in the 2022 tax year, which is this year. It would continue on for 2022 tax year, 2023 tax year, and 2024 tax year. It would expire in the 2025 tax year. So anything that was constructed in the previous 3 years would now be taxed on. And our office will be putting an assessment value on all the new construction for that 2025 tax year, and you will be able to tax on it. The impact from the first year, which was this year, there really wasn't much construction activity in Woodlands County. There was approximately 210,000 in assessed value for pipelines and 98,000 of assessed value for wells in your municipality. We do see, though, a major pipeline that is being constructed in your jurisdiction. That is the Keyera KAPS pipeline. This one is expected to be completed in spring of 2023. So it would receive the tax break on year 3 of the program. And come 2025, you will be able to tax that pipeline. We are looking at an assessed value of approximately $25 million in Woodlands County for the KAPS pipe. Okay, next slide. The assessment model review status update. A few years ago, Municipal Affairs did launch an assessment review of the pipelines, of the wells, and of the machinery equipment. There were a couple of reasons why it did get stalled. The potential impacts created significant stakeholder concern. Also with COVID. COVID kind of put it on hold as well. So we are now ramping it up again. And we are looking, the Assessment and Tax Policy Unit is looking at getting stakeholder committees together currently in order to get this review on the move again. Next slide. So the complaints for this year, for the designated industrial non-linear, which is your industrial assessment, the deadline is coming up May 6th here, so I'm not aware of any that have come through yet. When the slide was made at the end of last week, there was no linear complaints province-wide. Now we do have a couple, but we have not received the details from the LRPT. We're expecting to get those next week. There are 2 plants involved, and there are a bunch of wells regarding the tax holidays is what we know of currently. Where they are located, we do not know at this time. So we're just waiting on that information. But hopefully we'll have something next week. For previous complaints, there was the CNRL complaint for the 2017 assessment year and 2018 assessment year. The LRPT did, they rejected CNRL's case, and but CNRL is now taking it for judicial review. And this was all based on economic obsolescence. Okay, next slide. And that's all I have today to speak about. Is there any questions for myself or the team online here?
I have one. The 3-year tax holiday that you were mentioning with Minister Allard that she had announced, at the
Yeah.
time that was put on the table, excuse me, and the new legislation was written around that, we had made a suggestion that Woodlands County is trying to make sure that we're incentivizing good players and dealing in the penalties with the bad players that we have to deal with. So when you give a tax holiday, is there any requirement for those companies that are applying for the tax holiday to be paid up on their municipal taxes in their other facilities?
No, that is not a consideration. We look at what has been constructed in the past 12 months, and if it had produced anything in that 12 months to show that it was operational and brand new. That is something we can definitely speak about in our office, but currently the policy does not consider that they need to be paid up on their taxes in order to receive tax holiday on new construction.
Hey, well, I can tell you that if you end up with constructions that are being done with companies that haven't paid municipal taxes, then you've got companies that are developing using public money. So I'm hoping that you'll look at that legislation. And again, the province-wide, this 240 million in uncollected municipal taxes is a problem. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Wilhelm.
So my understanding of two items, one, the tax holiday, and then the assessment model review is both being done to promote construction and production within Alberta. When you guys are now looking forward to doing the assessment model review, knowing that you've now given a 3-year tax holiday on pipelines, well sites, et cetera, is that going to affect how you do the assessment model review? Because my understanding with that review is to try to make Alberta more competitive and create more construction, but that was also the point of doing the 3-year tax holiday as well. So are you still looking at essentially using the assessment review to decrease the amount of revenue that municipalities are getting, considering you've already given them a 3-year tax break?
I would say that they are completely independent of each other, but Dave Emery, I will allow you to expand on that one.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for the question. They are totally irrelevant to each other. The one was given as a incentive for construction. The assessment model review, that will be set up, and the rules and terms will be developed, and what is accessible and not accessible. But that is outside the linear realm or the centralized. That is a body that's called the Assessment Policy and Tax people. The committee or the working group will be represented by municipalities and industry. So it's not just industry sitting at the table to create these. It will be represented by all Albertans. I guess I'd best to say that.
Okay, thank you.
If I could follow up on that question, do you have those committees struck yet? What does the representation look like on those committees? Because I know that was a bit of an issue last time around.
No, they haven't been set up yet. The executives are now looking at it. They want to make sure setting up the ground rules and that. It will be announced pretty soon. I can't give you an exact timeline. Again, it's outside of our realm, but we have heard that it is going ahead. But to exact dates and that, you'll have to wait for the announcement.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Okay, I don't think we have any other questions for you. Can you hear me okay? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm on mute there.
I missed my opportunity to buy a coffee cup that says you're on mute, but, okay, I think that wraps everything up at our end for this.
They're more, they're more than welcome to stay online for the accurate assessment, or
Yeah.
they can leave.
Would you like to stay online for the accurate assessment presentation as well? We can keep you on, or you can, whatever you'd like.
We may have a couple staff that may want to stay on. Can we leave it open for those that would like to stay available?
Yep, that's fine. We can leave it open.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having us today.
Thank you very much. Do we need a motion to
No,
accept that, or would we?
well, you can do it all in
Okay.
one motion.
Welcome.
Good day.
Good day. Sorry for the delay here with lunch and the kerfuffle and everything, but we're working around it.
It's no worries from our end at all.
Okay,
Introductions of it.
yeah, we'll run around the room here again just so that everybody knows everybody, and we'll start with Mr. Frank on that end there.
Joe Melby.
Kevin Williams, Division 7, Force and Engineering.
Bruce Presley, Division 5.
Dave Cush, Division 1.
And John Burrows Reeve, Division 2.
Peter Kilken, Division 6, Freedom River, Goose Lake.
Jeremy Wilhelm, Division 4, Whitecourt East.
Alan Dean, Division 3, Whitecourt House Mountain.
Joan Slutwig, Manager of Planning and Community Services.
And Alicia Barbeau, Director of Corporate Services. Welcome.
Thank you.
Chris Meadows, Accurate Assessment.
Ray Fortin. And my name is Troy Bertles. I am your appointed assessor. The three of us, of course, are with Accurate Assessment.
Okay.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for letting us come today. It's always a interesting time of year for assessment and municipalities across the province. Our goal is to get this information in front of you before you set your tax rates. So I believe you haven't set any rates yet. The purpose of today, just simply to give you, the new members of council, a brief introduction to who we are and what we do for you. I know we have some new old members of council, some new members, and some existing that have seen this report many times. So for those of you that have seen this, please bear with us, and hopefully we don't bore you too terribly much. The main objective today is to go over the highlights of your assessment every year. So quick, just for introduction of our company. So we were founded in 1997. We're actually celebrating our 25th year in business this year. In a couple of weeks, we're taking everybody and their families out to Jasper for a fun-filled weekend to celebrate our years. We're very proud of that. What you see on the map is the green highlighted areas are our current clients. We have, of course, our head office is in Shore Park, 3 other sub-offices, well, I guess 2 on the map. Whitecourt, you may or may not know that I live in just outside of Whitecourt in Woodlands County. And then the other main sub-office is in Warburg, and the gentleman down there has some staff that helps in the southern municipalities. This slide here, we like to think of ourselves as your trusted advisors. So if you have anything assessment related, any kinds of questions you don't know the answer to, we hope that you come to us, because we can tell you what you're looking to find out. Of course, you just heard the presentation from Municipal Affairs with regard to the designated industrial property, so our comments regarding that type of assessment would be somewhat limited. If you needed to get detail in that regard, we would put you through to them.
an interesting stat on this page is combined we are 400 plus years of experience within our company. Next page, just a quick overview of the people that you might see in your municipality. As I noted earlier, I'm your appointed assessor. In the field, you'll probably run into Chris more than you will me. I'm sure some of you have spoken with him over the years. White GMC pickup with Woodlands County logo. That's Chris. So every now and then you're gonna get a call from somebody in your ward that says, "Who's this guy? He's in my yard, he's taking pictures, I don't know who he is, what's going on?" And that's just a brief idea for you to know who we are and what we're doing. We also let the staff upstairs know that we're gonna be out when we're gonna be out, just so that if they do get calls, they can quickly answer it as well. Okay. So this slide is really why we're here today. The intent is to give you an understanding of what happened for the 2021 assessment year, which is of course what the 22 taxes are based on, as it compared to 2020. You'll note on the far right the overall percentage increase or decrease. The second from the right column is the dollar value in terms of assessment change. So when you look at residential, you might think 22, 23 million in increases. Is that realistic? What that represents, what that 3% increase represents is inflationary growth and new construction growth. Okay, and I'm gonna get into that in a little bit more details in a couple of slides, but the vast majority of that 23 million is due to inflationary changes. So the market's increasing. Now, if we step back a couple of years and think of when COVID first hit, everybody and their dog had no idea what was gonna happen with the value of their property. So there was a little bit of uncertainty in the market. People didn't know if they should pay the same amount, should pay less, should pay more. So there was a period of time where the market really didn't grow, you could say. And then as time goes by and people realize that COVID is a thing that we're gonna get through and it's not gonna, end the world, then people got back to normal and were willing to pay what their property would be worth. So that's really what we are seeing here in the 3% increase, is that we're back to a typical market increase. It's normal to expect that in Alberta, albeit in the last 10, 20 years, there's been some serious growth and some serious decline, but this 3% is representing a modest increase in the market value of the property in the county. Now, if you go to the next line below it, non-residential. So this represents everything not dip related. So we're talking about gravel pits. We're talking about the industrial subdivision out at the airport. We're talking about the gentleman that has a trucking company that he maintains his vehicles in his shop in his yard. That's basically what all of that 75 million assessment is. Now you'll see that there is a reduction in the value of about 5 million for that category. And again, I'll get into that in more detail in a couple of slides. But generally, the majority of the assessment decrease was due to the value that we found at the industrial Woodlands Industrial Park. There's only 25 or 30 properties out there, and of them, there's only 10 or so that are improved. So when you think about how can we compare market value to 10 properties when none of them sell, that we have to rely on other sources of information, appraisals, listings, things like that. Well, this year we actually did see a sale, and it was, it lined up relatively good with the assessment from previous, but it did indicate a slight reduction in value. So a good chunk of that 5 million is from the property assessments in that subdivision are dropping. The next line, designated industrial property, you heard Janet Hayes speak to that already, as well as the linear. Farmland, you may or may not know, farmland in Alberta is another regulated assessment. So on this rate review that they spoke of earlier, the context that they're speaking in was in terms of industrial properties. There's a possibility that the government of Alberta may include farmland in that rate review. We don't know yet if they will or won't. But how farmland is assessed in Alberta currently is based on a formula. Essentially, here are the characteristics of the land. You look to a manual, there's that characteristic, that many acres, here's a number, and it spits it out. Has no relationship to market value at all. You cannot look at an assessment of farmland and say, it should sell for this amount. The two are unrelated 100%. So on a property, say a quarter section of land that you live on, the first 3 acres is assessed at market value, the buildings are assessed at market value. If one of those buildings is a shop that you run your business from, that's taxed commercially, which would be included in that non-residential line, and all the rest would be in the residential. And then the balance of the quarter, the 157 acres, is then assessed as farmland, and that's in this category. So a quarter of land with a home on it, let's say it might sell for, let's say 700,000. In reality, the assessment of it is only 500,000 because of that 157 acres of land isn't assessed at market. So that would be very interesting to me to see if the government decides to implement some kind of rate review on farmland. The impacts of it from an assessment perspective would be massive. Now, how that translates to taxation is a completely different topic, but back to the trusted advisor slide. If you have any questions about that kind of stuff, absolutely feel free to reach out. And then, of course, the last line, exempt. This is, churches, schools, farm exempt buildings. It's another thing about farmland assessment is if you have a building on your yard that is a barn or something used for agriculture, it's assessed, but it's not taxed. So that's included in that last column. If you recall last year's presentation, you would note that 103% beside the residential was 97%. It was down last year. So I like to look at that and think that, from a market value perspective, we're climbing, which in my opinion is a good thing. Next slide is basically just a 5-year comparison. There you can see right there. So I guess from 2019 to 2020 on the residential was flat. And then you can see a bit of an increase from 20 to 21. This graph gives you a really good idea of the overall makeup of your assessment base. Designated industrial property and linear property are, if you combine those two, they're the biggest piece of the overall tax revenue potential pie. On the residential side, it's up there as well. But from a non-residential perspective, when you look at that 3% drop that I indicated on the slide before, it's really not 3% of your revenue, right? It's just a small piece of the overall pie. Next slide is just a 5-year total assessment history. If this was extended out to 10 years, you would have seen a peak at 2014 and then a continual gradual decline. And that was pretty common throughout Alberta, throughout our client base. And then into 2021, it's also very common in the rest of our client base that we're seeing increases in assessment basis due to market conditions. So the taxable assessment change by percent, this is designed to give you an idea of how much of your assessment base is influenced by that 103% change. So you can see that almost half of your properties don't see a change. Well, this is partly because those farmland assessments that I spoke of earlier don't change based on market value. They're gonna stay the same no matter what, in a strong market or a weak market, so that's huge there. But the overall trend here is the slight positive side, and that correlates with what I spoke to the 103% change. Next slide is the same idea, just by a dollar amount in terms of assessment. The majority is slight to the increase. Just some general stats for you. New parcels in 2021, 16, that's pretty low. If you go back to 2020, only 9, and that speaks to the COVID thing. People didn't know, should I subdivide or not, or whatever. But prior to that, 25 to 40 in there was that's pretty normal for a Woodlands County to see. Most of those would be things like, I wanna retire, I don't wanna move, I'm gonna subdivide my home site off and sell my farmland. So that would be changing one parcel into 2. That just is essentially what that's contributing to. And then development permits, I like to include this stat just to, I kind of correlate it with market strength, right? The stronger the market, the more permits we typically see. Now, this number of permits may include, several new homes, might include some shops, things like that. But it's just another piece of information that I like to have for you. So residential growth and residential inflation. So this is where that 3% is broken down. So $4.5 million in assessment increase due to new residential growth. That's not really a big number. So of that 3% that I spoke to earlier, it's the majority of it is due to inflationary changes. And you can see in the last couple of years, the inflationary change or market change was in the negative. So I think it's a good thing that we're on the positive side of 0. And the next page is a breakdown of the non-res. It's about half. You'll note that how can there be a negative growth? So that would be the result of something being demolished or burnt or something has physically been taken away. That's why there's a negative there. Usually that would be a positive. In a real bad year, it would typically be 0. It means nobody's building anything, but this is kind of an extraordinary circumstance where there was some loss. So that comes right off the assessment base. So then I just break it down by different areas of the municipality to give you a highlight of the growth versus inflation in the different sectors. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Growth is pretty consistent around the different areas of the municipality. Inflationary changes, you might be surprised that the Whitecourt area is the lowest amount of market growth, but it's starting from a stronger point. So the assessments in that area are higher to begin with. And just a couple of last ones here. So this, I give you an idea of where we concentrate our visits on. Now, this doesn't mean that if it's not in the given year that we don't visit that area of the municipality. It just means that in that area, so for example, in 2022, we are going to be concentrating on the Whitecourt East area. So property owners in the county are required to take a building permit to build a new home or garage or whatever. Sometimes they don't. This is our mechanism to catch that. And then if there's a reason in anywhere else in the municipality for us to inspect it, we flag it, we go there, we treat it as if it's part of our regular maintenance as well. Now, in that 2022 area, that doesn't mean we're gonna knock on every door and talk to every property owner. We're gonna roll up, I should say Chris, when I say we, I mean Chris is gonna roll up and he's gonna have the assessment records, and he's gonna say, okay, this house was built in 1985, it's 1,200 square feet, I can see there's no addition, he's got an attached garage, I can see that, we have it assessed. There's no other buildings, I don't need to bother the property owner, so I'm gonna carry on. I'm gonna snap a picture and carry on. And so if in that particular exercise, somebody's home, absolutely, he'll drive in, introduce himself, tell him who he is, what he's doing. Give him a card if he needs to contact the county to confirm that we're on the up and up. But sometimes we'll pull in and do our thing and pull out and not know that there's a property owner there, and they might see, hey, what's this guy doing taking a picture of my property? Those are the ones that will generally call the county and research who we are. So that's a typical practice. And then in that particular example, if we roll up and, oh, wait a minute, there's a shop that we don't have on the assessment, then we'll go in and do our thing. If there's no one home, we will leave a door hanger for the property owner to get back to us and continue with our data collection in that regard.
Roy, just sorry to interrupt, but so in the case that you find a new structure there that's wasn't, there's no building, you report that back to administration?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
There are cases in the county that are interesting from an assessment perspective in terms of how we handle inspections. And Joan keeps us quite up to speed on some troubled areas, I guess we could say, so that we don't roll up on something that we're not prepared for. Kind of thing.
Now, on agriculture, is there a different tax assessment on the different classes like 1, 2, and 3 land, or is that across the board? Is that at?
Yeah, so the class 1, 2, and 3, that's, you're referring to the old Canadian land inventory classification. So the assessment manual, I guess you could say, in Alberta sort of ties in with that CLI rating, but it's now referred to as a final rate, farmland rate, productivity rate, yes, thank you, Ray. And it would be, so I'll give you an example. You're driving west of Leduc and you look at this nice black flat farmland. There's no trees on it, there's no rocks on it, it's gently sloping, it's got 2 feet of topsoil. Well, that would be rated at one of the highest assessments in Alberta. Now go up north of Fort Assiniboia and there's a fence around a bunch of swamp area, the guy has cattle on it. It meets the definition of farmland, but as I roll those characteristics through the formula, it would be rated very low on the rate. So the farmland tax rate that the county sets would be the same no matter what, but it would be applied against a different assessed level.
Okay, and then the second question would be, I guess, market access. The closer you are to your supply, is that a?
Yeah, that has a variable, it's a variable included in the formula of the assessment. And that doesn't change, right? Like your distance to market from last year to this year didn't change. So there's a whole chart that we have that says, you mile it out, okay, the closest farm center is Whitecourt or Barhead or whatever the case is, and it is a rating included on the assessment, yeah. So in other words, you could have 2 physically identical parcels, one next to a farm center and one 30 miles from a farm center. The 30-mile out one is gonna have a slightly lower assessment.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because if they were to assess farmland based on market value, I can tell you right now that brings out a whole can of worms.
Yeah.
Because it's big investment that's driven the price, not productivity or market access or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I believe, and I'm guessing, but if the province said, okay, we're doing a rate review on farmland and no longer, we're not gonna assess it at ag rates, we're gonna assess it at market value. If they were to do that, municipalities still have the ability to set a different tax rate that would be applied to that farmland. So that would be like I say, a whole nother conversation, but because you, as it sits right now, you might even, I don't know.
Oh, it's the same
It's the
right
same
now.
right now. Okay, so your farmland tax rate is the same as your residential tax rate right now? But let's say they did that and the assessment increased 5 or 10-fold, and you left the tax rate the same, yeah, you'd have some pretty upset ratepayers. So. Lastly for me, before I pass it off to Ray, as I noted, we're always available for questions from council and your ratepayers. If anybody ever has any questions, they go through the county office and forward it on to us. I spoke to our assessment cycle and I've also spoke to COVID. So with that, if there's any other questions for me, I'll take them or pass it on to Ray.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Ray Fortin, Industrial Assessment Overview. So I guess I've been in this seat in different capacities in Troy since about 2003. So we failed to mention that earlier. So we've been a number of years in Woodlands County and we appreciate that opportunity. So my part of the presentation, I'm the Industrial Assessment Specialist. This is our team of assessors. There are 8 of us. If you note, there's a few things here I want to acknowledge. We are all accredited assessors. The AMAA designation is important to us. That's our professional accreditation with the Alberta Assessors Association. With that, we do work on behalf of the Provincial Assessor Office. Our colleagues online, as Janet and Dave were on earlier, they are our colleagues. We do represent the Provincial Assessor's Office in this municipality. This municipality has been integrated with centralized, but there are a number of other municipalities in the province that I still represent the Provincial Assessor's Office, and I actually do prepare the assessments they were speaking to earlier in those municipalities as a subdelegate. So with that being said, we do about 37 to 40 somewhere percent. It changes every year of the number of parcels in the province. There's about 75,000 DIP parcels. So we still do a vast majority of the province Alberta, and we do have assessment services across the province, like I said, on behalf of the provincial assessor. The other part that we do is the non-residential, and what that is everything else that falls outside of what is DIP, which is what the province prepares. And that's, what is that? That's grain elevators, that's breweries, that's distilleries, I've got cannabis operations, I've got petrochemical processing, agricultural facilities, fertilizer plants, list goes on. And there's about 400 of those that we do in addition to, like I said, that other 37,000 properties in Alberta. So on this slide here, it just talks about where they are. So we talked about which properties are DIP. Of course, they're the ones regulated by the AER, the CER, and the AUC, which is basically the power utility side. So all the properties that fall out of that, in this municipality, small subset. We've got some gravel transloading operations at ANC. We've got the gravel pit operation, which is the windfill operation for Standard General. And we've got a number of small sawmill operations, and as Troy mentioned, some non-residential assessment. But more specifically, that's what I'm still looking at, our team, that we're looking at and preparing assessments still in the municipality. As I mentioned, the municipality has been integrated by the GOA. So when we look at designated industrial property, we talked about what it is for the split. The GOA did a good job at presenting what that is and what the assessment increases have been. Linear property involves one new property type, railway. So when DIP was changed, the definition of DIP property, they included railway. So I just want to mention that railway used to be part of the municipal assessor's mandate and role. Joanne Fortin, I believe, is online. She takes care of that on behalf of the province. So that portion of the assessment is now a regulated assessment, and it falls in under DIP assessment. A number of major plants in Alberta, in this municipality, I think if I could recollect when I was preparing those assessments, I think there's 3 or 4 that I can remember. In the province, there's about 300 and some. So if you look at Fort Hills as one example, $17 billion facility constructed, that's one of that type of property. And those properties do make up the vast majority of the assessment base in Alberta. Those properties are such significant assessed values, Northwest Wetwater Upgrader, examples like that do make up a large portion of the total assessment in the province of Alberta, as would be ANC in this municipality. right? So the pulp facility. So that's another type of property in your municipality. Another would be, of course, the K3 gas plant. So land and improvements associated with those types of properties, of course, also fall under DIP. So historical DIP assessment comparison, as the province indicated, about 742 million of the non-linear. Of course, DIP represents the non-linear and the linear component as the aggregate. But as we mentioned here, the 742 million, slight increase for this year. So designated industrial property moving forward. So as a representative of the Alberta Assessors Association, I do sit on a number of committees for a number of years, either representing the Alberta Assessors Association, which I do currently. There's 2 members in the province, Alberta. We represent working with the Minister's Office. I work within a group called the Executive Advisory Group, which is Municipal Affairs. As a representative group, the RMA is there. I have 2 stakeholders in the room there. I have ARMA in the room with us, and as 2 AAA members, myself and another colleague. So the GOA talked about these scenarios. So the last model review, I just want to touch on a little bit, even though they did. The last model review, none of those scenarios, A, B, C, D, were implemented. Rather, we went to 3 short-term incentives that were implemented, one of them being this well and tax holiday that we spoke about. The interesting scenario is that, yes, the model review at the time, A, B, C, D scenarios were going to provide a loss in the assessed value for municipalities. Under those scenarios, that was going to be the impact. But as Dave and Janet mentioned, they are exclusive. The model review is really intended to look at the rates of a property type and to modernize them. So if I wanted to use a well as an example, if the rate of the well currently for a crude oil pumping well was $2 million, and these are just theoretical, and if the modernized rate, since it's been updated as that rate, now is $5 million, the intent is to look at the new construction costs of those property types and to update the A schedule rates of that value. After we look at depreciation and all the things considered and what becomes tax policy, it could mean, even though the assessed value increases, doesn't mean necessarily the taxation would be. There's tax policy on that aside. But with that being said, the intent of the model review is just to update the values for assessment purposes, not really to look at potential reductions or allowances or provisions to create incentives for industry to do more construction or drilling activity or to promote growth in Alberta. However, the 3 incentives that were put in were directly related to that. They were incentives put in to promote and reduce the overall impact of taxation. So with that being said, I talk about the 3 short-term incentives. One is the well drilling equipment tax. We do receive monthly well drilling notices. In this municipality, there's been a very limited number of new wells drilled. So of course, the impact is $308,000 of total assessment in the province of Alberta. But the actual number to the province of Alberta is $768 million in assessment this year on the first year of the tax holiday. It equates to about $11 million. My colleague Mike Menard presented on this on another slide, but $11 million is the approximate taxation impact to that in the overall province. For you in Woodlands County, it's $308,000 of assessment of that 768. The other was the low producing wells. The low producing wells, there's a factor that's applied to wells at the end of their productivity and the end of their cycle, that value was increased slightly to give a lower assessed value. That was another short-term incentive that was provided in absence of the assessment model review. And the last, of course, we spoke of is the new wells and pipelines. And as I mentioned, the $768 million or $11 million in taxation. And as they mentioned, in for the next 3 years. Now, as we move on, we're talking about assessment model review. The assessment model review, as discussed, is that it is currently being reviewed. It's being reviewed in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen. Troy mentioned farmland, but there's all these other well, pipeline, railway, M&E, all these different types, telecommunications, power gen. There's so many types of regulated property. Under that blender of regulated property, we'll decide, Cabinet will, and the province, which ones will go through the next model review. And when we find out that, the stakeholder groups and associations, RMA and ARMA and the AAA Association will be the municipal representatives, and the urban, the AUMA, And then from there, it'll be the industry stakeholders, CEPA, CPTA, CAP, those organizations, all combined in one room, make up the representatives of the review. Those colleagues, as Dave indicated, are yet to be acknowledged who they are to represent which association. But in the last model review, some of the stakeholder organizations were not represented. And with that now, there's the intent to have each stakeholder group members at the table in those discussions. So I hope that occurs. I may or may not be part of that. I hope I am. But that is where we're going. And that'll have a lot of involvement about what'll happen, what the impacts are to your assessment. And we will keep council and administration abreast of those changes as they occur to what impacts that might mean to you. So with that, I open up to questions to myself or to Troy or.
I just have a question. Again, you say all stakeholders. Is there associated groups of ag people that would be invited to that decision-making process if there's an assessment review?
Yeah, yes. So indirectly. Indirectly, I mean that, as I talked about CAP is more of an oil and gas type petroleum producers, and so is CEPA. It's kind of a junior level of the larger organization CAP, and then there's a pipeline group, and then last, the Canadian Property Tax Association, CPTA. And what I'll share with you of that is almost my colleagues on the other side as we prepare assessments. They are analysts of what I do and prepare those assessments on grain and agriculture facilities. They make sure that the assessment's prepared accordance for their companies that they represent. With that being said, those individuals that are in the room representing Cargills and the Pioneers and all the other companies that we work with, they would be the relationship liaison with the farm associations or the ag producers in that consultation. But is there a direct seat of ag there? Not that I know of, but that's the only indirect body that I can show would be at the table in that regard.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that because that's the agribusiness side, and I think that there would be a purpose for us to pursue that through the services boards to see if there would be a direct representation from the agricultural community.
Yeah, understood.
I'll just ask a brief question, and I want to make sure that I got this right. Did you say around the assessment model review? So if I get this correct, on the old assessment model review, the one that didn't go through, if you simplify that process, the devaluation of the assets was occurring at a steeper and deeper rate. So they were occurring faster over time to a lower value overall. Would that be fair to say?
I'll try to reframe the question and see if I'm correct in your statement. So the model review updated the rates on the last model review. So not all regulated property was under review. It was linear, well and pipeline, and machinery equipment. So those are only the three of all of them. So with that being said, we went through the process of updating all of the rates. And at the end of the day, once the rates were all updated, they presented that as scenarios to the municipalities and what it would mean. And it meant the assessed values were going to decrease. And in essence, that was why it wasn't moving forward. The RMA then took a position that we weren't at the table, we didn't have that information, and that's where then the three incentives were implemented rather than the scenarios of the updated model review. In the instance I think you're speaking to is the wells, when I talked about there was incremental rates for low producing wells.
No, I'm
Okay.
So, and you're saying under the new, do you have an idea under the new assessment model review what they're going after, or did you say it's more related to production?
Well,
Did
no,
I
I
hear that
think
right?
just the model, when we talked about the assessment model review, it's all regulated property. Last one was well, pipeline, and M&E. I think this model review, whether we find out it's M&E, or whether we feel it's well and pipeline, or it could be telecommunications.
Okay.
It may be just telecommunications and just farmland. It could be farmland, telecommunications, and back at the table is the well, pipeline, and M&E. We haven't determined that yet. But at the end of the day, the same process is just really updating the rates for the assessment purposes. I can tell you there's been many a model review on regulated property. Not many of them have been implemented. I'll be respectful in saying that. There's been a number of them on linear property, well and pipeline that have been reviewed And at the end of the day, the process, it just doesn't get implemented. That has happened a number of times previously, and it just happened again on the well and pipeline. So we can still go through the process of the model review. Whether it gets implemented is another thing. But, we hope this time there are some implemented regulated property, because as we prolong the implementation of all these regulated properties, the longer we have of the original base cost that's determined for assessment, some of it dates back to 2005. So it's a number of years since some of those rates have been trended up for assessment purposes, which would see a better indication of the current construction costs rather than a construction cost that is almost indexed each year to the current year. That truth of the indexing to what the current value is really what the model does. Is that a true representation, or is the new rate developed the representation moving forward? And technology and changes matter, right? And cost of drilling a well and cost of technology. So that truth and reconciliation is really from the old cost to cost index to what the new model review rate is. That's what it's trying to do. And at the end of the day, it could be up or down in some industries.
Yeah, have you found that the way they do their drilling programs now with multi-pads and singular pipelines and stuff like that, has the new technology kind of balanced out the fact that the resource, that the infrastructure, I guess, that they need isn't as great? Is there a comparison there?
So now this is my opinions. I'm not a drilling expert, but I do understand the drilling activity in the sense that the technology has got them to where their footprint is more minimized by the drilling activities of the current technology. Meaning a surface pad location may be delineated 2 to 3 miles out, and that well bore that used to be toothpicks in the earth and sucking like a straw is now delineated and perforated miles out into the formation. By doing that now, multi-stage fracturing has allowed them to delineate, instead of 1 mile by 1 mile by 1 mile wells, the same of what used to be on 8 wells surrounding a home quarter, if you want to look at it, is now done off one pad location, and they creep those rigs across and continue the horizontal drilling. The multi-stage fracturing technology is highly technologically advanced to what it used to be. We used to think of acid frac or a stimulation was a big deal. Now we're doing 30, 40 stage fractures, 50 stage fractures with 400,000 barrels of water on site, and it happens in hours. That technology is impressive, and as you know, it's modernized and probably, if anything, proven and probable the reserve to being more accessible, if that makes sense. Because they have the ability to get those hydrocarbons in a way that they would be, essentially by the depth and the delineation, they now can produce those zones, whereas 20 years ago, they didn't have the technology to get to them. And that technology is really given longevity, in my opinion, to the fields that used to be depleted in their mines. Modern technologies have went back in and made those areas more profitable because they can get back into the reserve pool that they once couldn't. That's kind of the technology change, in my opinion.
It becomes a little harder on our infrastructure, right?
It does in some regard, and that would be more related to water, if I could speak to, and that's because they truck in so much water for these multi-stage fractures. And some of that is mitigated by surrounding reservoirs of water that they pool, or ponds, where they'll pump from, and they'll do it through pipelines, trying to eliminate a lot of the trucking costs. And in some areas that's available, in some areas it's landlocked, it's a titled area and private land, you can't do that. But in the Crown land, there are some ways they've mitigated those trucking costs and basically water fracking costs.
Okay. I'll ask one more question of Troy for myself anyways. If I get the number right here, the residential assessment went up by 3%, you were saying.
Yep.
And you're saying that's mostly due to inflation, not new development. Would you say that, and you said that's a typical, getting back to a more typical Alberta trend, correct? Would you say that the rate of inflation that we see and the rate of that appreciation in assessment keep pace with each other? Or are they offset, or?
We, in a lengthened period of inflationary growth, you'll see more new growth, right? People feel confident in the market. Yeah, I can build a new house now because I know next year it's gonna maintain its value, versus in a flat or down economy, people don't spend their money like that because they're worried that I'm gonna spend 300,000 and it's only gonna be worth 250. So it kind of tightens the purses. If I could look into my crystal ball and predict that, you know, we're gonna see 3%, hopefully a little bit more inflationary growth, my crystal ball would say we're gonna see more new growth as well, more than what we saw this year.
Okay.
Something could go sideways and that could be completely wrong too, so.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Nothing. That wraps up everything on you? Okay, well, I really appreciate the presentation and taking time to come and present to us and answer all our questions. Very informative, so again, appreciate it, thank you.
Lots of times we look at this as, you know, taking information and you're drinking from a fire hose, so I, again, just wanna say, if there's any questions, we're always available.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now we know where you live.
Did you have a? Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the presentation from Accurate Assessment Group and Alberta Municipal Affairs for information.
Okay, motion on the floor from Council Push, any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Let's take a 10-minute break here and we can finish our lunch. Actually, it's 3:15. We'll come back at 2:30. Okay?
I don't want to.
Preston, Division 5.
Dave Fish, Division 1.
John Burrows, Reeve, Division 2.
Peter Kilken, Division 6.
Jeremy Wilhelm, Division 4.
Alan Dean, Division 3.
Joan Slutwig, Manager, Planning and Development.
And I'm Jeff Allison, partner with Metrics Group, the firm responsible for the audit services for the county.
Okay, Jeff.
I have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if it'll pop up on the screen, or do you guys have it in front of you, or? Awesome. Okay, I'll get started. So usually with these presentations, I like to do a bit of an overview, kind of indicate why we have an audit and the importance of it, and really it's to enhance degree of confidence in intended users. So those users of the financial statement being yourselves as counselors, the province of Alberta, municipal affairs, ratepayers, those organizations or individuals that may have a vested interest in the financial performance of the county. This is achieved by us as auditors expressing an opinion. So we give assurance that numbers are free from a material misstatement. So what that means is, as auditors, we seek reasonable assurance. So it's a high level of assurance, but it's not absolute. So we do not audit every transaction that happens during the year. Also, as auditors, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism. So a questioning mind. We stay alert to conditions which may indicate possible misstatements. Such areas would include cutoff. We want to make sure that services rendered in the fiscal year 2021 have been accrued for and accounted for in that year. And subsequently, transactions that are recorded after in 2022 have been recorded in that year correctly. So we do a lot of work after year end to make sure that transactions have been correctly recorded in the correct period. Revenue recognition, we want to make sure that revenues are being recognized when services are being rendered, as well as collectability of accounts receivable. So is the receivables on your books deemed to be collectible, or should you have an allowance specifically for the amounts? And then also the critical assessment of any audit evidence, so has anything been altered? When it comes to your independent auditor's report, page 3 to 4 of the financial statements at the top, we indicate that the financial statements present fairly in non-material respects the financial position, results of operations in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So those are the same accounting standards followed by all governments across Canada, so local, provincial, and federal. When it comes to the basis for opinion, our audit is conducted in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. So whether you're a publicly traded company, a non-for-profit, or a municipality, the auditing standards are the same. Where you see differences is on the framework. In your case, you follow Canadian public sector accounting standards. Publicly traded companies follow IFRS. Privately held companies have their own framework, as well as not-for-profits. So auditing standards are the same, but the frameworks are different. When it comes to the next part of the audit report, responsibility of management and those charged with governance for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statement. And then the last part of the audit report identifies the auditor's responsibility for the audit, where we indicate there that our objective is to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. So we do consider relevant internal controls. Our procedures depend on our judgment as well. We do evaluate your accounting policies and estimates to make sure that they are in line with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So your main estimates being your useful life of your tangible capital assets, as well as your allowance for your doubtful accounts. So with that said, on your financial statements, statement of financial position. So this is a snapshot of where the.
I apologize. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Because I've seen materiality and things before that's been presented, especially with regards to the audit. Can you dumb it down for me? Like I read through the.
I talk about it in my audit findings report, but so materiality. So we'll have a benchmark for materiality. So we use 3% of operating expenses. For a lot of our municipal clients. So what that means is that if your annual surplus is say $2 million, if it increases by the materiality amount, say materiality is $500,000, if the annual surplus were to increase by $500,000 or decrease by $500,000, we would then deem that a user of the financial statement might have a different outcome or view of the financial results. So those users, again, are yourselves as counselors, municipal affairs, the province of Alberta. So that's what materiality means when it comes to in perspective of an audit. So we're saying it's free of a material mistake. We're saying it's free of an error that's of that amount that would cause a change in the net income.
Okay.
Of the statement. So, and again, materiality is really driven by the users. So who would have an interest in the results. So hopefully that helps.
Better.
Yeah. So with your financial statements, statement of financial position, you'll see your cash and cash equivalent position increased up to 15.7 million from about 5 million in the prior year. So that was a $10.8 million increase. So the county was able to generate about $14 million in cash through its operating activities. You then spent $2.3 million on tangible capital asset additions, and then spent another $1 million on debt repayment for a net increase of $10.8 million in cash. On the next slide there, taxes and grants and places of taxes receivable. So this is where the county was at in relation to taxes still to be collected in relation to December 31, 2021. So you'll see your current taxes and grants in place of taxes actually decreased by 1.6 million to 2.1 from 3.7. However, your arrears taxes have increased to 1.1 from 313,000. Majority of that, or 780,000 of that, is made up of Trident and Excel Energy tax amounts, so that's the portion in there. And then you have an allowance for your doubtful taxes of 2.1 million. So that does sufficiently cover the arrears taxes and a portion of the current taxes, leaving you with 1.2 million expected to be collected. So although if you do collect that money, although you have an allowance for it, it would just come in as a recovery into revenue, but we feel at this time there's a sufficient allowance to cover what we deem to potentially be uncollectible within your receivable balance there. On the next slide, so other receivables at year end, trade accounts receivables up to 1.3, receivables from other governments, so 958,000, that's in relation to disaster recovery plan funding in relation to your ice jam accrual, so that makes up that. Prior year you had other amounts for federal gas tax funding, as well as your municipal operating stimulus grant, or most, and then MSP grants. So those were collected in the year, but as of year end 2021, it's just the ice jam that makes up the majority of that. GST recoverable of 161,000, and then a small allowance for doubtful accounts of 48,000 left you with 2.4 million of additional receivables to be collected subsequent to year end. Back to the statement of financial position, your remaining other financial assets, a loan receivable, so you have 2.5 million owing in loans. You had a new one in the year for 25,000 to the Friends of Whitecourt Society, and you collected about 198,000 of repayments on those loans during the year. So after looking at your financial assets, the county ended the year at 21.8 million versus 12.2 in the prior year, or a $9.5 million increase in your financial asset position current year versus prior year. After looking at the financial assets, the county's liabilities, so what amounts are still owing at year end. Accounts payable and accrued liabilities up to 8.9 from 4.9, so this does contain 2 years worth of funds owed to the town. About 6.2 million is accrued in there. Additional trade payables or general payables of 2.4 million, and then wages owing of 258,000 make up the accounts payable balance there. Deposit liabilities are 291,000, and then employee benefit obligation for vacation pay of 300, and then deferred revenue at 1.33. So the deferred revenue on the next slide, this gives you a breakdown of grants to start the year that you had received, and then ones that you've collected during the year and revenue that's been recognized. So the opening balance is here of 2.5 million. You'll see your MSI, you collected your MSI capital funding of 2 million. Then spent 2.751, so you had such projects as shoulder pulls, road rehab, culverts, in which that money was used in order to fund. Municipal stimulus program, you had 278,000 come into revenue, that was in relation to the Horn Road. And then Canada Community Building Fund, it used to be called federal gas tax funding, was 832,000. You had spent that money, 600,000 on West Mountain Road rehabilitation, and 223,000 on the Blue Ridge Water Treatment Plant. So those are the amounts that were used for major projects in the year. And then at year end, you still have an additional 1.3 million of grant funding collected to be spent on projects into the year 2022. So after looking at that, back to the statement of financial position, long-term debt of 7.7. So there's a slide for that as well. So you have 9 debentures with the province of Alberta, various maturity dates, 2021 and 2032. Interest rates from as low as 1.26% as high as 4.89. During the year, you had paid interest of 287,000 on those debentures, and you had no new debentures in the year. After looking at that, your debt limits. So your debt limits are calculated as 1.5 times your total operating revenue. So the Municipal Government Act allows you to borrow in relation to that. So with that said, your total debt limit that you're allowed to take would be 39.4 million. So it is up from prior year's 34.7. Total debt 7.7, leaving you with an unused debt limit of 32 million. And a service on debt limit unused portion there of 5.3. So how much to be repaid of that debt per year. So you are in line with your debt limits when it comes to the Municipal Government Act. So after looking at long-term debt, your total liabilities for the year are 18.5 million versus 16.7, so a small increase there of 1.8. And your net asset position, although it says net debt on my slide, you're finally in a net asset position of 3.2 million versus prior year's net debt position of 4.5. So what that means now is that the county does have sufficient financial assets in order to pay off its liabilities and be left with $3.2 million in the bank. Whereas in the prior year, you were short having enough financial assets to repay all your obligations. Had you technically wound down or something like that, you wouldn't have had enough. So now you're in a position where you have a more of a healthier statement of financial position than you had in the past. So after looking at that, it comes to your non-financial assets. So your tangible capital assets make up the bulk of that. So these are your roads, water, wastewater, buildings used in order to provide services to the residents within the community. So on the next slide, you can see your net book value to start the year was at 89.4 million. You then had 2.5 million in additions. So additions for buildings, you had a shop in Whitecourt there. Engineered structures, you spent 2 million, so you did work on West Mountain Road, Flats Road, Horn Road, East Mountain Road, and a water plant. So those were all incurred in the engineering structures, and as well as machine equipment. You had SCBA equipment. I think that's fire stuff, right? Yeah. Yeah, for in there, so it's additional 400,000. And then your amortization, which is 7.2 million. So one thing to look at this is that your amortization represents the usage of your assets in the year. So when you buy, for example, an excavator or a grader, and they're supposed to last you for 5 years, you would take 1/5 of that cost, and it would be amortized into your operations through the year for the use of that equipment. What you want to be kind of, from the county's perspective, when you see your additions and your amortization equaling, then you can kind of say that, we purchase new assets to replace usage of current assets. In your situation, your additions are lower in relation to your amortization, so your net book value of your assets are depleting over time. Looking at it from the accounting side, it might mean that, your assets are dwindling away and not necessarily being replaced as much. So it's just something to consider or think about when you're looking at this change in tangible capital assets. So that left the year net book value of 84.3 million. So back to the statement of financial position, inventory for consumption, you had $400,000 at year end, so about 400,000 in gravel. Prior year you had 966,000 in gravel, so you were able to use what you had stockpiled there. And then 400,000 in materials and supplies. That left you with total non-financial assets of 85.6 million versus 91 million, or a decrease of 5.5 million. So when you add your net financial asset position and your non-financial asset position, you get to your accumulated surplus of 88.8. So on the next slide, this gives you a breakdown of where your accumulated surplus is at. So you do still have an unrestricted deficit amount of 3.2 million. But that is an increase of 5.4 million from prior year's 8.6 deficit. So there is still a shortfall there on the unrestricted side. When it comes to your restricted surplus, you're at 13.6 versus 12.7. So it's an $870,000 increase. And then your equity in TCA decreased by 4.1 million. So what this kind of means is you're able to combined unrestricted and restricted increased about 6.3 million when it comes to the cash component of your accumulated surplus, and your equity and tangible capital assets decreased 4.1 million. So within your accumulated surplus amount of 88 million, you now have more tied up in your cash area and less in your tangible capital asset area. Yep.
Can you just explain the difference between unrestricted and restricted? The restricted obviously is amortizing equipment, but unrestricted, that's still showing a deficit?
Oh, yeah, so your restricted surplus is actually, prior motions by county would have been to move funds into a restricted reserve. So there would have been an accounting entry for those, and that's kind of what these represent. What kind of happened in the last few years is a lot of the cash from the county depleted, so there wasn't sufficient cash in order to fund these reserves.
Okay.
But they stayed, they still stayed on the books as a reserved, and then all the shortfall went into the unrestricted. So if you were to net the two together, you'd be at about a $10 million positive position, more or less, in relation to that. So you're getting closer to kind of.
So the previous year would have only been about a $4 million.
Exactly, yeah. So now it's moving up due to the increase in the financial asset position. That $7 million change there. It's kind of represented in the increase in the unrestricted portion there in the change. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So yeah. So again, you're kind of moving into a position where hopefully your unrestricted surplus can get to positive, and then you'll have restricted surplus as well to positive, and then you'll actually have cash to actually fund these reserves and amounts going forward. So that's the breakdown of the accumulated surplus. On the next slide here, this shows your operating revenue. So on your statement of operations, so the money that was, or the revenue that was generated by the county. So your net municipal property taxes are at 20.1 million versus 19.5 in the prior year. So you did have an average rate increase in the year, about 7.48%. You had a decrease in your assessment, about 3.6, so that netted a change of about 3.4 in the current year versus prior year there. Government transfers for operating, so that was up to 2.6 million from 1.5. So there was work done for road graveling, stormwater rehab, and then a slope stabilization on Township Road 593, I think it was. So these are in relation to, these are recorded as operating grants because the expenses are, they're not capitalized, but they're expensed in the year in relation to the work being done. When it comes to other, you're up to 1.8 million, so that was in relation to your PERC program for prior year taxes collected in relation to requisition payments. So that was about 1.5 million, so that's why you see an increase there. Other revenues are pretty consistent. So that resulted in a 26.3 million versus 23 in the prior year, or a $3 million increase, or a 13.5% increase year over year, and an $809,000 increase over the budget amount, a 3% increase there, more or less in relation to the PERC money coming in the 1.8 in the other. On the next slide.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'll just roll back real quick and it should be a really easy answer for you. But onto back to the accumulated surplus.
Oh yeah.
Would you assume, all things being the same, our budget and our taxation rates being the same, we should see like we went from 8.6 to 3.2 between 2020 and 2021? Will we see a similar increase between 21 and 2022, all things being the same?
Yeah, I mean, if you did the same thing this year as you're gonna do next year, I would think that you would change the same.
It would be the same
Yeah.
margin of increase?
Yeah. The only, obviously the PERC money, that's an extra 1.5 million that you won't be getting that again.
Mm-hmm.
So you wanna look at stuff like that, like those one-offs in that sense. But yeah, I would think you'd end up in the same position. Kind of depends too what you spend on capital in relation, because you only spend a couple million on addition. So if you keep that in the same spot, yeah, I would think so. I mean, it depends on the budgeting, but I would just watch for the one-time outlays, and then also watch the tax collection too, right? So obviously you do have a $2 million allowance there. Do you expect to collect all the amounts again? So I think you did a better job this year of collecting versus in prior years. So if that keeps going, and obviously oil prices are good right now, so hopefully, you get payments in that industry too. So you should be, hopefully good, I would think. I think you're on the right track. I mean, it's been a couple of years and things have gotten better the last 2 years from where they were prior to that before. So I think this is year 3 for me in auditing. So from the beginning to now, it's definitely come a long way. So
Is part of that better position to the, what did we get for the flood?
Yeah, there is some payout and there's some left on the, flat road, right?
Yeah, there's still money to come in because that project just
But there
finished.
was some money this year.
A very little bit, a lot of it had to do with the one-off COVID type grants.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So this, this pie chart here, it kind of shows you a breakdown of the percentage of your revenues. So net municipal property taxes make up 77%, where actually in prior they made up 84%. So they actually make up less portion of your entire revenues, mainly in relation to the increased government transfers for operating, in relation to the most grant being recognized, as well as the additional PERC funding in the year. So that was the change from there. Expenses by function or by department on the next slide here. So this is where the money goes based on a department standpoint. So transportation being your main expense there of 13.8 million. So you did have 2 emergency service projects in the year for about 700,000 that weren't budgeted for. So that's where you see the increase there of 13.8. Administration, so you had 6.3 as actual, budget's 8.4. You had budgeted for a $3 million provision for bad debt there, but you only needed 390,000 of that. So that's where you see the change in the budget in that sense. Utilities and waste management, so solid waste expenses.
Could you come back to that? So it budgeted for how much for bad debt?
3 million.
3 million, and only had to use.
We only needed 390,000 on the allowance change, yeah.
And so the bad debt consisted of what?
So it'd be the change in the allowance, or the factor of change in the allowance as well as any write-offs that you would have had.
Changing the allowance, I don't understand that.
So with the amount, so at year end, say there's 3 million still to be collected. There's an allowance of 2 million. So you could either increase so if your allowance increases to 2.5 million, that amount is reflected as an expense in here.
Okay.
Yeah, or if it wasn't part of the allowance, if you've written off any amounts, then those would be reflected in that number as well.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So sometimes you set up a provision, like when you set up an allowance first, and in hopes that you'll collect it later and recover that. And then at times you would write it off. And the reason you would have written it off is to collect the PERC money in that sense when it comes to the other ones that were deemed in prior years. But yeah. So utility and waste management is at 1.8 million, protective services at 1.1. So at year end, you ended up with total expenses of 26.3, up slightly from prior years, down slightly from prior years, 26.5, and a budget amount of 27.5. On the next slide, you kind of see your expenses by function. There's a dark blue for the current year, light blue for the prior year, and then the line represents the budget. So you'll see that most of your expenses, solid lines are just under or slightly above where your budgeted line is. So there's no huge variances there in relation to what was budgeted for, and then kind of the representation of the actual. The next slide, expenses by object. So this indicates what the money was spent on as opposed to what department it went into. So your amortization expense was 7.2 million. Salaries, wages, and benefits being your largest expense there of 6 million. Contract and general services, you spent 5 million. So you had your sloping of Township Road 593B was in there for 360,000, as well as additional emergency service projects. Transfer to local government, I have a typo in there. It should actually be 3.4 million, not 9.5. So that was actually in line with the budget there in relation to transfers to the town.
So 9.5 should be 3.4?
Yeah, I should say 3.4,
okay.
Another typo, yeah. Because I was trying to figure out what the variance was last night and realized that was typed in there wrong, so my apologies for that. Materials, goods, and supplies, so that was at 2.9 million, so you had additional gravel expenses versus prior year and budget there, so that's why you see the increase. And that would be in relation to the decrease in the inventory coming in there and the usage of the gravel. And then provision for allowances, so you'll see your budget there was 3 million and the actual there was 391,000. So that left you again with 26.4 million in actual costs versus 26.5 9 for the prior one, and the budget's about 27 million when you make that change to the 9.5. This pie chart's not very good, but it kind of just gives you a breakdown. Amortization makes up 25%, wages, contract and general services, and then transfer for local governments. So on the next slide, when we look at your operating revenues and operating expenses, you end up just at a slight deficit of 96,000, which is definitely better than your prior year's $3.4 million deficit you had from operations. You then get grant funding that you use for capital purchases of 2.4 million. So 831,000 that was federal gas tax funding, and then 1.3 million of that was MSI capital. And then total other revenues was 2.2 million, which then leaves you with an annual surplus of the year of 2.2 million in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards versus prior year's 1.7. You'll notice in here there's also a restatement amount. I have that in my audit findings report, but there was a federal gas tax funding that should have been recognized as revenue in the prior year in relation to bridge rehab work once reports were filed with the government. So we had made that change to increase prior year revenue by that, and then it gets adjusted against accumulated surplus here. So with that said, on the last slide in summary, the county ended up with an annual surplus of 2.1 million. Net financial asset position now of 3.2. And then I also have an audit findings report, but in summary, there's no significant control deficiencies, no unusual accounting policies or estimates. We have some unrecorded misstatements and no significant difficulties. And we just want to thank management and staff again for their support in completing the audit. They were able to provide the information to us in a timely manner so we could get our work done. And I just want to thank them for that. And if anybody has any questions, I could take some now and then I can get into my audit findings report.
Any questions from council? Kind of asked as we went, I guess.
Trending in the right direction.
So yeah, I was gonna say we're trending in the right direction, but not out of the woods yet.
Mr. Reeve?
What's that? Oh, go ahead.
So I'd be prepared to make a motion to approve the 2021 audit findings report and the financial statements of Woodland County for the year ending December 31st, 2021.
Okay, motion on the floor from Councillor Dean. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Okay, well, thank you very much for.
I'll go through my audit findings report though real quick.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he
I'll do
had a
that.
whole other party one.
That's okay, you approved
Oh,
it,
yeah,
but I'll go
I
through it.
jumped
One more presentation.
Sorry.
It's like, I think.
It's okay, you guys will be
No, I
sleeping
think
here in
it's
5
before
minutes.
this.
Oh, okay.
It's like, oh, I think we jumped the gun here.
Yeah, this is good. I'll just jump. Actually, so this is our audit findings report. So in this report, I kind of discuss audit results. So areas of focus that we would have focused on, risks we would have had, how we mitigated those risks. I'll also discuss asset retirement obligation, which is the new accounting standard coming down. Talk about materiality a bit. And if you have any questions when I'm going through this, feel free to ask. Yep.
Hey, Mr. Reeve, I just have a question. The lawyer letter that we sent to the lawyer to say if we have any legal obligations, where is that? Like,
That'd be in my audit file.
is it not, don't we make those statements in the audited financial statement?
No.
Or have they taken that out?
No,
They
so
used-
we would look to see if there's any obligations in which we need to book an amount owing.
Right.
That we're trying to get from them, but if stuff's undeterminable or the conclusion based on whatever their findings are, then we would just have a note indicating that you're potentially involved in lawsuits.
Okay.
Or have none. So
And they
those are-
indicated nothing at this point?
Yeah, so
Okay.
honestly, I'd probably have to look. I hope I got the letter in from them today, but that's kind of the gist of the legal confirmation.
You should have got it yesterday, I think,
Yeah.
but it was late
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything in there based on what we had sent them. I usually read them when I get them. But
Yeah.
I've gotten quite a few lately. So when it comes to the executive summary, purpose of this report is really just to promote two-way communication between ourselves, the auditors, and yourselves as counselors, update you with any changes to our plan scope. So we feel that we are independent of council, so we do not hold a financial interest or an economic dependence with Woodlands County. In order to finalize the audit as of today's date, we'll complete our subsequent event procedures. We'll obtain a signed management representation letter. We'll complete our required communication to council, which is what we're doing right now with the presentation, and as well as obtain evidence of council's approval of the financial statements. And then from there, we'll be able to issue signed audit financial statements. There were no changes in relation to our audit planning report when it comes to our audit findings. On the next slide, responsibilities. I spoke about this earlier, but in summary, we performed our audit in accordance with Canadian generally accepted accounting standards, and that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. On the next slide, we talked about materiality. So here, we've used 3% of operating expenses, or $630,000, as our benchmark for the county audit. So what that would mean is that if your annual surplus, which is 2.1 million, were to increase by 630,000 or decrease by 630,000, a user of the financial statement may have a different view on the financial outlook or performance of the county. So that's kind of how materiality, and when we say reasonable assurance, we're saying that it's within that materiality kind of guideline when it comes to the annual surplus for the county. So hopefully that kind of helps out with that. The next slide, audit results. So this is where we discuss areas of focus. So our main area of focus is really management override of control. So management's in a unique position where they could potentially post journal entries in order to increase accounts receivable, for example, revenues, adjust amounts to conform with budget. So here we use data analytic tools to or computer automated techniques to go through the entire general ledger of the county. It identifies journal entries that potentially have, or say posted Saturday night, or have specific round numbers, or have other characteristics that may deem them to be potentially not business related journal entries. We then test those to make sure that they are actually business related. And after doing that, we had no significant findings from that. So instead of just testing large transactions, we use different tools to help identify things that potentially could be fraud or error within the financial statements. Our next area of focus, our main one, would be revenue recognition. So we want to make sure that revenue is being recognized once performance obligations have been met. So we look at your grant agreements, we look at the costs associated with the grants that are being applied for to make sure that they're accurately recorded at your end. So although we had no significant findings here, we did have a restatement of deferred revenue in relation to 2020 when it came to the federal gas tax funding. Net municipal taxes, so our risk here is that the property taxes or assessments applied are not appropriate. So that would mean that the assessment values aren't accurate, or the rates that have been approved by council were not applied to the taxes. So we have recalculated your taxes as well as your over-under levy to make sure those are accurate. So we had no findings there. When it comes to user fees and sales of goods, we want to make sure the correct rates again are being applied when it comes to that. So we perform a test over a random amount of transactions throughout the year, as well as perform other additional substantive procedures to make sure that those are accurate. So we had no significant findings there. Operating expenses, we want to make sure that there's no fraudulent expenses, as well as expenses are in the correct period. So we we update our understanding of process and controls there. We do test internal controls that the county has. We also test significant expenses as well as non-significant expenses to make sure that they're accounted for within the population, and as well as look at transactions after year end. So we look at transactions posted in 2022 to see if they actually should have been posted in 2021 and make sure that your cutoff controls are accurate there. So we had no significant findings there as well. On the next one, salaries, wages, and benefits. So risk there that you potentially have employees that don't exist or are being paid incorrect rates. So we do assess your internal controls there. We reconcile your salaries, wages, expenses with your T4s, as well as perform additional substantive procedures over termination and new hires to make sure those are accurate. So we had no significant findings there. Cash and cash equivalents, we want to make sure that your cash balances are accurate, so we confirm directly with the third-party financial institution. Again, no findings there. And then receivables. So this is a big one. Obviously, the county could potentially have receivables booked that are deemed to be uncollectible. or you could be overstating your receivables in order to increase your annual surplus. So we do look at receipts, payments subsequent to year end for deemed collectability, as well as coordinate our work over accounts receivable within revenue and deferred revenue to make sure that it's complete. So we had no significant findings there. Other large amount for the county here is your tangible capital assets. So the risk there is that you have items that are capitalized that should be expensed, or items that are expensed that should be capitalized. So we do work over repairs and maintenance accounts to make sure that there isn't anything capital in nature, as well as when we're looking at your capital additions. We're performing tests over invoices to make sure that everything has been recorded correctly, as well as recalculating amortization expense and gain loss on any sales in the year. So we had no findings there as well. Last two, accounts payable. Again, we want to make sure cutoff is accurate, so we didn't have any findings there, but we also do look at council minutes, as well as recalculate your vacation accrual to make sure that rates and hours taken at year end are accurate. And then deferred revenue, we want to make sure that you're in compliance with your funding agreements before amounts are being recognized as revenue, so we had no findings there as well. Long-term debt, we confirm that directly with the province of Alberta, and then inventory for consumption. So your gravel pits, we want to make sure that those have been measured by a third party, and now we've adjusted the unit costs accordingly from weight to volume, so we had no findings there as well. So when it comes to our significant findings, we did not reveal any significant internal control deficiencies. We feel that your accounting practices and estimates are in line with your policies as well as Canadian public sector accounting standards. We encountered no significant difficulties as we brought to the attention of council. Our management representation letter, when we get that signed, we'll be able to issue signed financial statements. We'll be submitting a management letter to the county management, so if council would like to look at that, you can definitely, management will definitely provide that to you. And then adjustments, so we did have a restatement of the year, so in 2020, the county did incur tangible capital asset additions that were funded from the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly Gas Tax Fund. The asset additions were claimed on the reported statement of funding and expenditures submitted to municipal affairs. No corresponding revenue was recognized for this amount. As a result, we have restated prior years' deferred revenue and annual surplus by $459,000 in relation to that. On the next page, unrecorded misstatements. So I spoke earlier about materiality being $630,000. So here we have adjustments that were not made within the financial statements that resulted in an understatement of the county surplus of $329,000. So items there, we recorded a difference in gravel inventory of $10,000. We adjusted taxes receivable balance by $160,000. So we felt that the allowance should have been higher there. We adjusted FCSS funding. So last year we had recognized $84,000 too much, and we had ran that through this year. So this is a reflection of picking up that difference. And then as well as the town's 2021 cost sharing estimate accrual, so we felt that it was about $400,000 too high based on the information that we obtained on that. So the net effect of these four would cause your annual surplus in order to be understated by $329,000 had these been adjusted for in the financial statement. So again, we don't think this would change any of the users' views on the financial results of the county, and we're happy that we're fine with having these as unrecorded misstatements and sign off on the statement not being materially misstated yet.
So is this what you're looking at here when you're looking for that limit of materiality?
Yeah.
Is here, so it's a summary of it, or how do you look?
These are just entries that we had noted where there's variances. So for example, like the town's accrual was $3 million, and we thought it should have been $2.6 million based on the support we have. So so right now your statements have the accrual at $3 million, not 2.6. So this is just showing you the difference in that. But we don't feel that whether it's $3 million or 2.6, that a user of the financial statement is going to have a different outlook on the results.
Because it's below the $600,000 materiality
exactly.
limit. Okay.
And these are, I mean, it's very common to have, a few of these within an audit. Usually a lot of them pertain to, sometimes going to be differences between the auditor and management, like in the sense of the accrual.
Is that your trigger then for what a significant finding would be, that materiality
A significant finding, well, like you mean in relation to, when we're looking at those areas of focus or whatever?
Well, when you say, no significant finding, I mean, not everything's to the penny, it never is, but.
Yeah, we'd be looking at like, material adjustments that we're kind of making. Like if we were showing up and having to post I just think back to the first year, like a $4 million allowance or a bad debt, like that would be kind of a significant finding in receivables, right? Like,
Right.
those type of things. We're looking at like material adjustments, larger things that would be in relation to council wanting to know. Yeah, and then we kind of save, our management letter will contain some non-significant stuff, in relation to stuff that we might have noted during our audit that could potentially be cleaned up, but it's not necessarily significant that it needs to come to council. So after unrecorded misstatements, appendix 1 is just required communication there in relation to our independence. So we do not hold a financial interest or position, personal or business relationship or economic dependence with the county. Appendix 2 is our management representation letter. This just indicates that information provided us was forthcoming. And then appendix 3, new and revised accounting standards. So there's 5 new accounting standards coming out for December 31, 2023 that could potentially change the county's statement of financial position or operations. The main one being asset retirement obligations, so PS 3280. So this section requires the county to report any legal obligations associated with the retirement of a tangible capital assets and a solid waste landfill site. So what this is saying is that you potentially have assets on your books, such as a building that maybe has asbestos, that liability now needs to be booked on your financial statements, whereas in the past it hadn't until you had to deal with it. So this is a new section coming in the next couple of years. So definitely some work is required to be done on the administration end in order to identify assets that meet that definition. So in appendix 4, I have about 4 or 5 slides here in relation to asset retirement obligations, but in summary, an asset retirement obligation could be the decommissioning of a tangible capital asset that has been acquired, constructed, or developed, remediation of contamination of a tangible capital asset, post-retirement activities and monitoring, or constructing other tangible capital assets to perform post-retirement activities. So what we're kind of gearing up for here is we'd like at least our clients to start identifying if they have any potential assets that meet the definition of having a legal obligation. Another example could be potential fuel tanks that you could have at your sites or public work sites that potential have contamination cleanup, asbestos in buildings. There could be other ones. Hopefully going to have some more examples as we start going through this, but those are just a couple general ones to start looking for, and that there is any legal obligation to clean anything up. So we're just looking for work to kind of be done on that. Yep.
So those new standards come in for next year's audit? Or do they come in for the
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, 2023. So
Okay.
the reason we want to get started on this now is that if we do identify things, we want to make sure that the county's in a position to hire someone to go and assess the cost that it's going to take so we can account for those correctly, as opposed to doing it 2 months before year end next year. So that's kind of why we've been kind of preaching to start looking at this. The benefit really of this too is that, so say there is asbestos in a building, and potentially today it's gonna cost a couple $100,000 to clean up. You plan on, the building's useful life is gonna end 30 years from now, so you'd have a liability that would enter your books of about $200,000. And then over the years, that liability would increase, and there would be a resulting change that would go into your statement of operations. So from there, then you're able to, if you generate a positive operating surplus, you're then putting money aside in order to remediate that 30 years down the road. Whereas if it's not on your books as a liability, and all of a sudden it just pops up, you have to pull from your reserves, in which case you might not have had money for it, or you might not have been saving knowing that you'd have to do it. So there is a lot of value, I think, in the asset retirement obligation and having it on your books. It's definitely just quite a bit of work to kind of go through all your assets to kind of think about, is there potential any asset retirement obligation that exists with anything on there. All right, and that's kind of kind of it for my presentation. Again, there's some more slides in here on asset retirement obligations and contaminated sites if anybody wants to look through, but it's kind of just a thing to identify the difference. Yeah.
So this is more a question for administration, but from what I understand, the briar patch in Blue Ridge, that's an example of something, so we'll have to, at budget time, we'll have to have that conversation.
Well, hopefully it'll be gone before the new, we have a property that we're in the process of demolishing it and getting rid of the asbestos, et cetera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So that's already been budgeted for then?
yeah, for this year. yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Clute?
Now, somewhere you had an org chart in this, where, here it is.
Oh, the last page there, that's just a decision tree, yeah,
Yeah.
so kind of helps you to identify if it meets the definition or not of an asset retirement obligation. So really, there needs to be a legal enforceable, like, obligation there to do something. You know, potentially, you know, gravel pits, reclamation of those.
Yeah.
To meet the definition of something like this, right? If county is accepting responsibility to kind of remediate those things, or you know, put it back to use by planting trees or filling them in, right? So those type of costs are an example as well.
A recreation lease might be
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah, so those are just things to like start thinking about. I'm gonna put together, my plan is this, I'm gonna put together kind of a project roadmap for administration, kind of what to start doing and looking for going forward. So when we get to the end of 2023, we're kind of done. And then putting together a work group amongst my clients to, you know, if one county finds something here, letting other ones know to maybe look at their assets for this. Kind of do something like that to help make sure that everybody's picking up what they should be. Hopefully we get them. I know when we did tangible capital assets, we had clients, we were adding bridges and roads years later, so hopefully that doesn't happen here, but, you know, the hardest part from an audit standpoint is completeness, right? Do we have everything? And sometimes not knowing, you know, it's just the way it goes, but I'd like to make sure we do some work to make sure that we got them.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We should probably make a motion to.
I did.
I know, we did it ahead of time.
Except
here,
the
so-
second part.
Would you like me to do that again?
Just the first part. Council approved the audit findings report, right?
Okay, I can do that, so.
That was the audit findings report portion that we
Yeah.
just did. We did the audited financial statements earlier, so let's do that, and that way we're covered off here.
So just point of order, did we vote on that motion?
Yes, we did.
Okay, all right. So I'll move that council approve the 2021 audit findings report.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. All right, thank you very much.
Awesome,
Jeff.
thanks for having me. It was nice to be in person. This is my first time presenting it out here, so lots to have been virtual, so.
Oh, that's right.
It's actually my first time in your chambers, so yeah.
Did you not present at the
Pardon me?
at our
Orientation.
orientation?
Well, I was at the orientation too, yeah. This is my first time in your, council chambers, because the first two we did, that was right when COVID hit, when I took over as the partner, so, yeah.
You live in Edmonton?
Yeah. I was actually at the MT at Bonnyville in the morning. I just drove across the province to come to here, so looking forward to going home.
So are you a partner with Terry and Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my two partners here, they actually have an office in Whitecourt here. Our firm does, yeah, so they operate that with Amanda as our office manager, yeah. Yeah, and I work out of the Edmonton office. Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, you guys. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Okay, so that'll bring us on to council reports and questions. I got everything right here, yes, I did. Okay, where did I start last time?
You always start with me.
Always?
Yeah.
I'll start over here then. You always say that. but-
You said that last time.
We're gonna start with start with Councilor Dean then.
Well, a lot happened in the month of April and half of March. The two highlighted areas that I'd like to talk about was, first of all, our strategic planning session. I thought those 2 days were, the time spent together was very valuable. In particular, apart from coming up with a revised strategic plan, the time spent with staff and just getting to know one another on a more personal point of view was very valuable for myself. And then I was one of 3 members of council that went to the Economic Developers Association conference last week in Kananaskis. Beautiful setting, although you're inside the hotel for 24 of 24 hours. So the conference for me, the highlights, first of all, was networking. You meet people from all over the province, and you identify similar goals and similar concerns and learn strategies. And then in particular, Peter, I know you would have really enjoyed 2 or 3 of the sessions. Both John and Bruce and we met with Herbert and Josh Law from Trust Bix. And that feedback may have gone back to you, but their focus is agriculture and agri-food. Herbert and Josh would be happy to come out to our AcDev committee, our Ag Service Boards committee, sometime in the fall to see what steps we might be able to take to engage them to help our communities. And then the other 3 sessions that were particularly valuable was one on rural immigration, just making sure that you have the metrics in place to allow your community to bring in immigrants. And the economic forecast that was given to us by the ATB chief economist. Now, you talked about the global uncertainty. Everybody's aware of that. And the fact that we are expecting interest rate increases. And in fact, we had one today. It was a 0.5 point today. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And then I just conclude with talk about one last session, and that was on energy. So there was a panel of 4 people that were talking about the energy situation in our province, and the one panelist that stood out for me was a guy by the name of Wes Jickling, and he's the CEO of COSIA. And what COSIA does is represents all of the players up in Fort McMurray to ensure that the environmental messaging coming out of that industry there is consistent and is meeting the world's requirements. And I thought it was an interesting example of all of those players are in competition with one another, but they recognized that was an item that they needed to cooperate on and come up with a cooperative strategy. And so I found that interesting as well. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Councilor Dean. Any questions to Councilor Dean? Councilor Wilhelm.
Okay, yeah, it was a busy one. I attended a few things. First thing that I want to talk about was the first joint liaison committee that we got to do between the town and the county. We had a few topics to discuss there, which don't need to be brought up, but I did want to say that I thought that it was the start of conversations that could be had with the town. There was some frank conversation there, which was a great way to start, and I think that that's a great starting point between our 2 municipalities in starting in any kind of discussions moving forward. So I really enjoyed being part of that, and I thought there was somewhat of some traction to getting conversations started with their council again. Strat planning was awesome. I really, really enjoyed it. I had a great time there with everybody. Like Councilor Dean said, that's the first time we've truly had a chance to do some team building, and I thought we did do a lot of team building there. Had a great time. Got to wear a cape for a little while, so that was good. Yeah. And then finally got to go to my Community Futures orientation this week. It's been something that I've been having to keep missing meetings because of work, and I'm going to work with them to focus on trying to make sure I can be a more productive member with that committee. But I really enjoy being allowed to be part of that group, and there's going to be some, I believe, interesting ideas brought forward from Community Futures around our proudly rural ideas that we had coming out of strategic planning, and some ideas that they are going to hope to be able to facilitate between us and other rural municipalities for some opportunities. So I wait for that to come forward. I think you guys are going to like some of the ideas that they have for that. So other than that, that's all I have.
Any questions for Councillor Lovell?
Okay, well, my since our last council meeting has been basically the highlight for was the strat plan session, which was really interesting for me, just to see how the strat plan, the existing strat plan, actually was added to. And it's one of the things that we really have to be concerned with is that we don't just put it on a shelf, that we actually refer to that. And that was a really a part that was important for me. I really enjoyed the time sitting with the staff because we don't get an opportunity to do that very often, and it was fun. So thank you for that. Then we had a Municipal Planning Commission meeting on the 6th, and very interesting development there was that we had development issued for Monty McNeese, who is bringing a endurance race to the county of Woodlands. I think this is his second time, but he wants to make it an annual event, so we approved a permit for him for every year, so that he doesn't have to come back every year. Very interesting. It's going to be great for the community because it's going to bring up to 400 people in and really showcase, the beauty of that end of the county. And I found that, somebody who has that kind of energy and stuff like that, I've actually seen the guy a number of times and wondered how he fit into the community because I'd meet him in the store when he was coming back from one of his runs. So that was good. Then on the 11th was really interesting for me. We had another strategic planning session that was with growth, and we had some real soul searching to do there. And Bert Roach, basically, and Jenny Bruns from Barhead, who's the EDO there, facilitated that for us, and it was very, very well done. One of the things that came out of that strategic plan is that it's super, super important that we get the economic development strategy really involved with all of those councils, because of the mistakes that were made in the past. There were a lot of people that weren't invested in growth as much as they should have been, and so we lost a lot of momentum, which has been carried by some of the committee members, basically Walter Proichus, who really, really worked on Wild Alberta, which I think is going to become a product of the growth initiative in the RETA. And one of the things that came out of the discussions and the people that we had in the circle was that we really have to be concerned with the geopolitical situation and how that's going to affect economic development within our borders. And some of the things, and it's a possibility you can get this, you can probably get on YouTube, is to have a look at the 2020 Forum on Sustainability that was in the United States, and you begin to understand how the population and energy transition and all of these things are gonna start to affect us as municipalities. And the big one was that municipal government and corporate basically drive policy. And that was really interesting for me. So when we started developing these pillars that we want to work under as growth, we aligned them with this municipality because that's what has to happen. And the big one was, it's something that we should probably work on that came out of that, was we need to have an invitation, an annual sit down with all of the municipalities that are involved in growth, plus invite ones in that have an interest in regional economic development that are in our zone, to start to move this whole thing forward as a region, because at some point in time, we're going to have a concise, joint effort of what we're gonna do, that how we push some of this stuff through the RMA. So that was kind of my last 3 weeks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Copen. Any questions? All right, Councillor Williams.
I had met with the Emergency Management Advisory Committee, went through the emergency response guidebook. A ton of work went into that by Scott and a lot of others, I'm sure, put a lot of time in that as well. So it's nice to see that, because that's mandatory that we have that, so kind of getting up to date on that. The strategic planning session, you guys pretty much covered that off. That was really good. I really enjoyed that, like to see that whole process of how you've seen it on the website before, but I didn't realize how much actually went into that to get to that point, so I really enjoyed that. And our culture and events survey went out. Obviously, you guys all know about that. I've been getting quite a lot of questions and comments from people about that, and it seems like a lot are filling it out, hopefully. But sure, a lot of questions on it. And then I just had an Ag Society meeting in Fort Assiniboine, and the Hoedown, well, they decided this a little while ago, but the Hoedown's gonna go forward this year. So pretty excited about that. It's good for the community, and they're thinking of a lot of things to do there to bring people in, so hopefully lots of you guys come too. They're doing trick riding at the Hoedown, or at the rodeo, so that'll be worth the drive. And that's about all I had for now.
Any questions, Councillor Williams?
Is there a proposed date for this event?
It's the third weekend in August.
Okay.
Yeah, for the Hoedown. It'll be a pretty good rodeo, and fireworks are Friday night. They're definitely worth coming for. So.
Are we able to camp at your place?
You can stay in my camper with me. It'll be there.
Are they having fireworks on July 1st?
No, the fort pretty much always saves all their money for the Hoedown, because it's
Yeah.
quite a show that they usually put on. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to it, but
Yeah.
it's pretty good. So that's what they try to target more. Lawnmower races. There's gonna be lots going on. There.
Lawnmower races?
Yeah.
Okay.
I might even enter a lawnmower. I'm not sure yet. I got one built, so. So that might be worth it.
Build a few more and we'll have Counselor's Challenge.
Yeah, we'll put John on mine.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Williams. Councillor Preston.
Much the same. Strat plan went very well, and the part I liked this time was we invited management. Previous years, we just had council and directors, and it was so nice to get their perspective on what we're doing, because they are the boots on the ground. So it was good input from them, and it turned out very well. I went to the emergency management meeting with Scott and Devin, and it's amazing the information that's all in that book. The book is probably 5 inches thick on everything that needs to be done when there's an emergency. And believe me, it's a lot better to be prepared on that than not have that. It could cost us millions of dollars not being prepared. Went to the Economic Developers Conference. very good conference, very good speakers. One thing that was consensus was all the companies that were there, there was people from CN, Port of Prince Rupert, some other ones, I can't remember who it was, but the thing they all had in common was they can't find labor. One of the nice things is Port of Prince Rupert now has 30% of their workers are Aboriginal. And they're working it up to more females working at the port too. Like he said, you don't see longshoremen as women very often, but they're doing it. CN is the same way. So if you own a company and you can't find truck drivers or whatever, you're not the only ones. It's right across the country. And we had a Blue Ridge Community League meeting on Monday, kind of status quo, everything is going okay. And that's about it.
Okay, next, Councillor Krestich, any questions? All right, Councillor Kush.
A couple things. Everybody else here sat in the strat plan session. Felt that couple days there is extremely valuable for helping with the direction the county, kind of needs to be going as by the vision we put together here. I had a Whitecourt Library Board meeting. Biggest thing coming out of that, we had a presentation from the staff at the library, and they kind of explained to everybody what they did, and all their different roles and all the different hats that the staff that you have in those facilities have to do. And some of it's a little surprising. A lot of people don't realize the amount of work that goes on in the background with repairing books and everything like that. From they don't always come back in the best condition. Like Councillor Wilhelmser said, the survey went out, definitely fielding a bunch of calls, just people having kind of questions about some of the stuff that goes out with it. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully we have a good turnout on that. Was fortunate enough to be invited to the Anselmo Cemetery Board meeting they just had. They wanted to thank the county for their donation. You got a card there they gave to us. Just kind of show what they have going on and whatnot, just as the county representatives, kind of a better idea of what their group's facing. Lastly, through Anselmo, we also do have a barbecue coming up on the 30th here. I'd love to say I'd invite everybody to it, but everybody's kind of itching to get out. Tickets went on sale last Friday, and within an hour, the barbecue sold out. So should be a good time.
Yeah, everybody's excited to get
Everybody just wants to get out
outside
and do
in
something.
person, do something. Excuse me. Any questions to Councillor Kush? No? All right. So I'll wrap it up here. It's one or the other. The one thing I did do is have a conversation with the chair of the library board really quickly. They're just explaining I think we've been feeling a little pressure on the end of things with library. Council still has to have a conversation about that with the legal challenges that are in front of us on the rest of it as to what we're gonna do, but I just wanted to explain our position on it as of right now. So that was done. The survey around the Arts and Culture Center participation is certainly generating lots of conversation as well. And I see a few people rating a few comments that are not in exactly the most flattering light to us on Facebook, but this is part of the public consult portion of these types of engagement, so we're looking for that feedback, and the decision is in no way made, so just so that people understand that that's where we're coming from. We're genuinely seeking public input on this by releasing these types of surveys. The strat planning session, I think I'll echo what everybody else had said, that it's really good. Councillor Wilhelm stole my proudly rural thunder there. Sorry.
I knew I shouldn't have done.
No. It's our proudly rural now. So I was really happy to see that some of the conversation coming out of that. Went to the Economic Development Association conference as well. And one thing that we forgot to touch on is the site selector that is going to be held here in Woodlands County. Can I go ahead and announce that?
This,
The site selector?
yeah, because it was already announced.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just making sure I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it was coming out that morning, so the site selector is, this is gonna be an international group that will bring in site selectors from a very large portion, looking for areas to locate businesses within all of Alberta. So this is the first time it's ever been held in Canada, and our economic development officer, Bert Roach, was the big driving force behind that. So good for Bert and good for Woodlands County. So we're looking forward to seeing how that pans out. And that's the end of things for me. Any question?
Just one with respect to the results of the survey. So the survey closes on Sunday?
I believe it's the
That's correct.
18th.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, this,
1 a.m. on the Monday, April 18th.
Yeah, 1 a.m. on Monday, April 18th.
And how are the results going to be distributed to council and to the public at large?
yeah, your worship, our intention is to bring a report to council at the next council meeting, April 27th.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if council, one, that the information wouldn't be made public once council has their agenda, and then council's decision thereafter.
Yeah.
Would be made public.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Clute?
Yeah, on that note, Al, one of the things is that I found very interesting when I got a phone call, it was more of an attack phone call on what the hell are you doing? Getting involved with this, and I don't take a neutral position. I think the discussion around this table has always been, our fiscal responsibility, so that's the one that I put out on the table, because that is my responsibility as a leader, to say this is what our council is looking at in the future, and that's my position. And the minute I did that, the attack stopped. So I think it's really important that people know what we see as our fiscal responsibility. And I know I think I got 11 phone calls from, and I think we should acknowledge that these people are interested in what's happening in their community. That's the big one, is that we need to acknowledge that somewhere down the road that we've had good participation, because I would like to see our community people participate more in these types of things. And it had some interesting conversations.
Well, and that public participation was certainly, public information and outreach and more public consultation was definitely part of the strat planning session too, just for those that are watching here. So with that,
Can I just
Yeah.
make one more comment?
go ahead, Councilor Prestige.
I'd like to make a special thanks to Alicia and her team. They came into this, we were in such a mess. And it's cleaned up.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prestige. I'll be sure to pass that on to the staff, because they were a big part of it.
Okay. With that, I'll accept a motion to accept council reports for information.
I'll make the motion to accept the council reports and questions as information.
Okay, any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We've got the CAO verbal report.
Yeah, your worship, members of council, as indicated, the survey will be on your next council meeting of April 27, as well as the strategic plan, business plan for council's review. We will give it to you normally in your package, but we'll also give you, if council's not comfortable passing it just simply with any changes or anything like that. We'll give council time to review it in depth, because it is probably a 5-page document with several key indicators, and there are some great ideas that staff have come up with in regards to some of the strategic initiatives that council has identified. As well as tentatively, Joan will present a recreation agreement with the town of Marathon pending us receiving and administration reviewing the agreement between the town of Marathorpe and Lac St. Anne. They have come to an agreement. My understanding, they've signed the agreement. We just want to review it to understand from our perspective how they arrived at their recreation component. And then we'll put together an RFD, working with Joan, put together an RFD for council's consideration on that. For the new councilors, there's a motion prior to the ICF that council, let me back up. The town of Marathorpe asked for an increase in their recreation contribution based on user fees. Council tentatively agreed that, but subject to all the dealings between the town of Whitecourt and us concluded, and their commitment to the town of, or sorry, not the town, the Lac St. Anne County, their agreement between the two. So I think we're at that point that we can move forward with that. So the electronic sign in Fort Assiniboine, the Legion was gracious enough to build it. The Pembina Hill School Division was generous to donate the land and look after it, and council was agreement of doing the maintenance on that when the machine or the sign malfunctioned, and we have an individual, Stetler? No, out of Cochrane that comes up and fixes it when he has other work in the area. So just thought I'd let you know that we are dealing with that matter. The Pembina zone meeting is on April 27th. Do you guys get an invitation directly? I always like.
Haven't yet, no. I haven't seen anything.
Okay.
Pembina zone.
Yeah, the
That's
only
what we're
reason
called.
I know
Zone
about it is
3.
because they announced it at that last zone meeting.
Zone 3, I thought it was on the 25th. That's when it's.
Sorry, it is the 25th. Sorry, I went
Okay.
my wrong arrow. I went
Okay.
my wrong arrow. Council's on the 27th.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll put it in your calendar, and if, does all council anticipating on going, because we were supposed to let them know?
I'm a yes, tentative.
Yes, yes.
What time does it start? Noon?
9:30, I think it's 9:30. Is it 10?
I have 10 to 3.
Okay, 10 to 3.
That's normal, yeah. Yeah, they call it the Pembina District 3.
But yeah, no, we never got anything
Monday,
officially
the
as far as I know.
Yeah, it should
So
come
you're
from
probably
Michelle
working,
Andrews.
because don't you get off on Tuesdays?
My Monday's booked up. Someone.
Is that April or May?
April. So just before the next council meeting, the Monday before the next council meeting.
And it's at the,
It's in Edmonton at the
Royal.
Royal Oak Inn, and we'll send an invite out, just so that you guys are aware of it.
I think it's called Royal West Edmonton, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on 178th Street, 100th Ave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where.
And then everything else is in closed session.
Okay.
Worship members.
Any questions for CAO Frank? Councillor Kush.
Make a motion to accept the CAO report for information.
Thank you, Councillor Kush. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. That actually gets us through the whole thing here, except for 12.1 and 12.2, and both of those are in closed session. So I'll accept the motion to go into closed session. Councillor Williams.
I'll make a motion, we, council goes into closed session under point 17 and 19.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. All right, so we're coming out of closed session on items 12.1 and 12.2. We've got a couple of motions arising, so Councillor Bush.
I want to start by making a motion to, council appoints councillors Devin Williams, Peter Quilkin, and Bruce Prestige to serve as council members of the Pride Valley Aggregate Oversight Committee from May 1st, 2022 to October 31st, 2025.
Okay, any discussion on that? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Councillor Wilhelm.
I motion that council appoints Bill DeGroot, Ashley Marcellus, Cecil Aldrich, and Jason Price to serve as members at large on the Pride Valley Aggregate Oversight Committee from May 1st, 2022 to April 31st, 2025.
Thank you.
Can I just make a friendly amendment instead of April 31st is October 31st, 2025?
Correct, thank you, sir.
Very good. So the friendly amendment's accepted?
Accepted.
Very good. Motion on the floor from Councillor Wilhelm with a friendly amendment. Anybody, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Councillor Kuchen.
Okay, I make a motion that the council appoints Dan Kapler, 7M Construction, to serve as industry member at large on the Pride Valley Aggregate Oversight Committee from May 1st, 2022 to October 31st, 2025.
Good, thanks, Councillor Kuchen. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. And Councillor Kush.
Make a motion the council directs administration to re-advertise for an industry member at large position for the Pride Valley Aggregate Oversight Committee from May 1st, 2022 to October 31st, 2025.
Very good. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. With that, we have item 12.2, which is just, except for Councillor Kush.
Make a motion to discuss the ICF arbitration update as information.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? All in favor? All right, who wants the last one?
You got one more?
You got one more? What's the one more? Oh, that's the special, yeah. Go ahead, Councillor G.
So I move that council schedules a special meeting for May 2nd at 3 o'clock in council chambers.
Okay, any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Councillor Kush.
Motion to adjourn.
Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? All in favor? Any opposed?
You remind them every time of that.